That sound good?
Yeah.
Okay,
We're recording.
okay. So this is the RPAC meeting of regular meeting, January 5th at 6 o'clock, and we have a quorum with Neil.
Michael's not here?
He hasn't jumped on, so.
Okay, so we don't know. So everyone else is here. Right.
Yes.
Okay, so let's give to the minutes. Can I have any comments or a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so then let's go right to our topic of discussion. If you remember, we had our meeting with the actuary. We decided to agree with inflation and mortality rates. And we also agreed we needed to chat a little bit more about the discount rate and the decision we might make to the Board of Finance next week on what we think would be a good philosophy on that. Diane, do you want to give like a little background in terms of like how we fall in? I could just, I guess, we fall in the midpoint between us and other towns. There's some higher, a few lower. In terms of what are the main points? So
Well, I mean, I think we heard from Brian Binkley, also the plan investment advisor, that they are comfortable that the 675 falls within, the band that is acceptable for a 30-year look, a long-term look. Obviously, they discussed certain alternative scenarios for increasing return, but that was sort of decided that maybe that this is not the right time to do that. So from the investment advisor standpoint, 6.75 is okay. Ellen Kosensky from Hooker and Holcomb also, even in her presentation, if you still have it available from December 8th, they were comfortable with our current 6.75 required rate of return. That being said, there are studies out there. There's a lot of information out that says discount rates are coming down, but maybe it's something that this group would revisit a year from now, or even 2 years at the next valuation, because both parties, actuary and investment advisors, said 6.75 is fine. The implication of lowering it increases how much the town would have to contribute to the pension plan and the OPEB if you change both, how much you'd have to put in that's the actuarially determined employer contribution.
and that was just somewhat significant in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range, if I remember.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think she said, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to refer you to her presentation, which was on page 13. If instead of 6.75, which the pension contribution would be 1,647,000, if we lowered it 10 basis points,
130 grand.
the contribution would be 1,880,000,
Wow.
or $232,000 more.
Yeah. So that's one thing. And obviously whatever we decide is going to be great, but I just did a little back of the envelope, a little research. So, and it's not for 30 years, it's only between 10 and 15 years. But BlackRock is saying US large cap for the next 10 to 15 years, they're thinking 6.1%. And BlackRock has always been an aggressive forecaster. They're saying bonds fixed income should be around 1.7%. If you look at JP Morgan, they're saying 5.6% for large caps over the next 10 to 15 years, and maybe 3.4% on the bonds. If you look at Vanguard is saying 3.5 to 5.5% 10 years over the large cap stocks, and somewhere between 2 and 3% on the bonds. So nobody is saying 6.5. Now, on the other hand, nobody is saying 30 years either.
Right. 30 brings everything back to the mean.
Right. But this is a little bit like retire at the wrong time and watch the market evaporate a big chunk of your equity holdings. And then there's just not enough time to catch up before you're dead.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question. Rather than hop around, with rates over the 30 years, do you think that, well, how that looks is not, we want to know our philosophy. So what is our philosophy on this number, first of all? And then let's try to get the numbers to back it up. But, I'm afraid that we just say, oh, well, I feel unlucky this month. You don't want to change every year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People are not changing them as a rule. So are we out to say we want the most conservative of all the towns? Of course, we're going to pay for that. Are we saying right in the middle is fine? Are we saying let's get reckless?
Yeah, I mean, we can be pretty aggressive on 6 3/4 because the town's very wealthy. So if we really wind up having to do a huge ADEC contribution 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road because we don't get 6 3/4, the town can easily afford it. We'll just raise taxes. But I think we should. I know that Vanguard and Hooker and Hooker say that they're comfortable with 6 3/4, and I just don't understand how they can be comfortable at 6 3/4.
Well, and I might say, George, and maybe it's putting your sentiments in a different way, but in my brief experience on this committee, Neil, in prior years when we kind of said, so what does that 6 3/4 look like? It was always, oh, you're good. You're fine, right?
Yeah.
Well, and what are the other towns doing? Oh, don't worry, you're right in the middle. Yeah, okay, we're fine.
Mm-hmm.
What I kind of am getting now is that has changed to, no, I'm still okay with that. Right? It's changed in a meaningful and tangible way. Now, I agree with you and with George that there is a point of view that says, look, we have the benefit of enough financial wherewithal that we can afford to be somewhat aggressive within the zone of prudence, right? We can afford to be somewhat aggressive here in order to take advantage and not to unduly penalize ourselves with a distortedly large ADEC this year just because we think the number looks better. I get it, we can play it. But I do think one of the reasons why we're having this conversation is because even though the bottom line from our advisors is, 6 3/4, we're still good with that. It turns out the manner in which they're conveying that comfort, I feel, is changed in a tangible way. It's kind of like, I can still defend that. I can still find my way, which is different. And so then it causes us to stop and say, well, hey, now, what does the 6 3/4 do for us today?
Right.
What could it possibly do for us in the future, for better or for worse? And, how do we strike that balance, it seems to me.
So what do we gain if we get tougher on ourselves?
Well, I think what we gain is that, for example, if we were to adopt a view that over some period of years, we were to trend downward, and we could say, look, we're going to trend downward in 2.5 basis points.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think it's definitely.
We don't have to do 10s and 25s, right? We can do 2.5, right? But if we could trend downward, then if it turns out that we did have to do an adjustment, we've spread that out. We've spread the pain a little bit, right? And we've already incurred some of it. That, to me, is the main benefit.
I just don't think she wants to, because maybe she wants to do something at the state level.
I think that'll interference there.
Yeah. So, what do we gain? Well, I think we gain, and you're probably going to disagree with me on this, Neil, but we gain perhaps a more realistic evaluation of what the future state of rate returns are going to be. And I agree with Tom. We don't need to do 10 basis points. We don't even need to do 5 basis points. Maybe this year we don't need to do anything. But I think we got to put it on the table that says, next year or the year after, when Holcomb comes back with the next set of projections, we've got to be prepared to start moving this 6 3/4 down to something that's more market sustainable.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't, yeah, I mean, I think over the next year or two, absolutely. I don't want to run in and change it every year, but,
Right.
but you know,
I agree with George. We could adopt the view as the RPAC making recommendations to the Board of Finance that, look, we don't think we need to get started right away. And today, in this particular year, is enough of a one-off that we don't even think we need to start, you know. We do think we need to adopt a program of trimming this down gradually in bite-sized digestible pieces, right? So that over time, the impact is not quite so harsh, right?
so
And
how are you going to present that? You're going to present that as what? We don't really think it's going to be a factor, but we're going to trend down slowly over the next couple of years, anticipating.
Well,
I would just say that our inclination would be, all things being equal, that would be something we would look forward to. And if in fact next year the situation holds, you may well expect that that is going to be our recommendation, but realize that the 6 3/4 isn't coming with a sterling gleaming, oh yeah, recommendation, right? This is sort of like, well, you know, we can still, you know, keep this ship afloat, but realize that, you know, over time the market may move and whatnot. Just say, well, look, so we're happy to go with it this year. There's a lot of other business that we need to take care of in this budget. We don't feel like upsetting this unduly here, but just we're putting our marker down here that
we could,
you know,
we can paint with a really big brush on this. We can just say macro global economic trends are not, we're becoming less comfortable with macroeconomic global return trends. And as a result, we want to tee this up for the Board of Finance that not this year, but maybe next year or the year after when Holcomb comes in and does the next 2-year bite, we may be coming back and asking for an adjustment in the trend line.
Yeah, but separate from the market, can we say we have a philosophy? We always like to be, or do we just look at the market and we let that be our guides?
Well, you know, I guess we could always say, you know, we just want to swim with the herd, and we could take a look at the, what is it, our DERG, right, our reference towns, and see what their rate of returns are, and I think it's in Holcomb's report. And you know, we can say we want to be the midpoint, or we want to be the mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that sounds fine.
And that would be good, because then we're sort of like saying, you know, the wisdom of crowds, right? I mean, everybody's kind of in the same boat, and we just want to be in the middle of the boat.
Right.
We don't have an advisor saying that we're out on the lunatic fringe. I mean, we have an advisor saying, you know, hey, this looks okay, but we're just telling you that when we go out there and look at the marketplace, you know, the advice and the pundits, and all the experts, it seems like the conclusions or recommendations are far from uniform. Right. And, you know, there's a lot of sort of chaos going on out there. So it's going to be somewhat less predictable. And of course, we always need to see what the coming year will bring. I mean, if equities have a stonking year, that could change Blackstone and JP Morgan, whatever. But just kind of say, like George said, wisdom of the crowd, we're right in where we should be here. We have advisors telling us this all makes some sense, but realize over time, this may be a little bit aggressive. And so what we would want to do is perhaps adopt a program of trending it downward.
So I have
subject to review each year, that continuing that program is sensible in light of circumstances.
So I have an idea. Maybe we could take a look at. Diane, could you go back, you know, 4 years or 6 years or whatever it is, and do we have the data that says, okay, 6 years ago or 5 years ago, this is what Darienne's return assumption was, this is what Wilton's return assumption was, blah 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 blah, and then see where we are 5 years ago in that spread, and then compare it to where we are today against those same towns. And if 5 years ago we were at the 65th percentile in terms of everybody's return assumptions, and this year we're at the 70 percentile return assumptions, then that would give us some kind of a benchmark, Neil, for us to go back to explain to the board, okay, we're trending up towards the higher end of return assumptions, and we want to just keep an eye on that. And maybe next year or the year after, we're going to come back with a plan to try to regress us back to the middle of the pack. Does that make any sense?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I could even give you a little bit of that data right now. I don't know if you have the Ellen's presentation from the last meeting in front of you, but on page 16, she has the chart there of, the main towns that we compare ourselves to: Darien, Fairfield, Greenwich, Ridgefield, Westport, and Wilton.
Yeah.
And that is based on everybody's fiscal year end, June 30th, 2019, because we don't have all of their 2020 data.
Right.
So I have the numbers from fiscal year end 2017. The only town that is different from that chart on page 16 is Greenwich. They in 2017 were at 6.75. So somewhere between 2017, I'm expecting they probably changed it with their 2018 vow. They went from 6.75 down to 6.5. None of these other towns changed from 2017 to 2019. And I don't know yet. I could put out feelers too. So I could even go back to 2015 to see when they made, like, when did Darien go to 6.5? I think Westport went to 6 1/8 when Gary Conrad started there back in, I don't know when that was, Cheryl, 2011?
2011.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we would reference Gary as the appropriate guide in anything that had anything to do with finance. But that's just
You
my
mean
own
Darien or
personal-
Westport?
No, Gary.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said, right. Well, nobody else is even close to 6 1/8. So I will go back, George, absolutely. And I'll see where they all were 5-6 years ago. And I'll see if I can find out if anybody is making a change here this year as well.
Okay.
But it's unlikely to color our position anyway, don't you think? I mean, so what happened in 2015 in Darien is.
No, but Neil, you were saying it would be better if we had some kind of a
Philosophy.
mission statement or a philosophy or a guideline. And what I was thinking is, if we could go back to 2015 and see where we were among the distribution of return assumptions among all those towns in 2015, and then see where we are in terms of 2020 against all those towns. If in 2015, say we were, the fourth most conservative, but in 2020, we're only the seventh most conservative, then that would give us some kind of a benchmark to go back to the board and explain, we're thinking about trending our return rates down over the next 5 or 6 years in order to move ourselves back into the middle of the pack where we were in 2015. Because all of the towns that we refer ourselves to are all sort of like in the same boat. And therefore, they're all looking at the same stuff. And therefore, if they all come to relatively the same conclusions, we can piggyback on their analysis and their insight. That was what I was trying to do. But if you don't think that works, we can come up with something.
Well, I think the way you said it, one of the things you said that we may be encouraged to trend down, trend down over time if trends continue, present trends continue.
Yeah.
That sounded less definitive, which I think we're being less definitive on forecasting. That, saying it that way, someone might say, why? And then you'd have your answer, well, if you look at the pool, the numbers have been coming down and,
Just look at, you see it all, you see it better than anybody. I mean, just look at, it's hard to make money in the fixed income markets these days.
I've said that for 20 years.
You built a career on that.
Every year, it's 40 years. If every time that the bonds cannot go lower, they
go lower. Yeah.
They cannot go lower. They cannot go negative.
Mhm.
So I mean, that just means I can't predict. It's, yeah. But I mean, I think that explaining it that way, I think we just want to be, unless we absolutely have a philosophy, which we might want to, of getting tougher on ourselves.
Mm.
I don't want to make it sound like we've made a decision to ratchet down if we haven't done that. But the way you said it, we were going to review it. There's some signs that certainly people would agree. There's some signs that there's more pressure on the number.
Yeah.
And if we're going to keep an eye on that, and if it comes to being a factor that's important, we might have to look at this again.
Yeah, that's what I think we should do. We should frame it like a heads up,
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, like an early weather forecast.
Yeah. And I think and I sure agree with Tom. This would not be the year for us to go in and say, hey, why don't we just add another $230,000 to the town budget?
Right.
They'll run us out of town on a rail,
Well, that's that you don't want to forget that part.
Yeah,
No.
Knows what's going to come up in these numbers.
because it's already going to be from what I've seen so far, it looks like it's going to be it's not going to be fun. January, February, and March are not going to be fun.
Yeah, as opposed to the usual budget process, which is really fun.
Yeah. Right.
All right. So what else on this investment rate of return, or anything else we need to just on that particular topic?
Nope.
I think we've got a position. What do you think, Cheryl and Diane?
I like it, and I think Diane can definitely put some stuff out for you guys tomorrow, and you can kind of look through it and go to the Board of Finance. I think it's a good way to go. I definitely think going up this year would be a problem. I've been sitting in budget meetings this week, and we've got a lot on our plate. So I definitely think pushing it off is smart.
Yeah, good. Okay, and Diane, you're there?
Yeah, I am here, and I agree with Cheryl. I think this year, just going with the recommendation from Hooker and Holcomb to fund the full ADAC with the current 6.75% discount rate is probably appropriate given the unusual environment that we're in. Then we could always go back a year from now if rates if we're not meeting that expected required rate of return after this fiscal year, and maybe then it's appropriate to lower that rate. Maybe we lower it by 1/8, or as you said, frame it to the board that this is coming down the road. If we continue with this low interest rate environment, particularly, and we have 35% in fixed income, it might be prudent, as you said, to stay out ahead of it and potentially a year from now or two, consider lowering that discount rate,
Right.
just so nobody's surprised.
Okay.
Right.
Bill?
Again, under a program that's, gradual, trending it down, and importantly, reviewed every year. So whether or not we have to keep trimming by modest amounts, or whether or not circumstances are such that we can halt that direction and just, hold firm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that we don't have to go all in on day one on this thing.
Yeah.
We can do a death by 1,000 cuts,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe that is in some ways is kind of a long-winded answer to your initial question, Neil, which our philosophy is to manage this, right? Really, which is what we're trying to do, given all the other circumstances and all the other priorities that are screaming for the attention of the folks involved in the budget process. We have our advisors, we have our peer group, we have what we see in the headlines. We're all kind of saying, we're good this year. Given everything else we have to do, this part's good.
Yeah.
Just want to put our marker down. We need to keep close attention to this, because we may be finding ourselves in a situation where we need to begin a process by which we, that kind of thing.
Yep. It's not quite a philosophy, but
No, I agree.
But at least it's a view.
you're monitoring, but what are your measurements?
Yeah.
What do you
Well, what I always like is when they say we're actively monitoring.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know what the difference between monitoring and actively monitoring is, but
covering their eyes. Oh my God. All right, I think we've achieved our goal of the meeting. What do you think?
I agree.
Okay, all
Excellent.
right. So Diane, we will have another meeting. I guess you'll fish around and find another time for us.
Right, I'm gonna first ask Ellen if she's available next Tuesday at 5 o'clock
Yep.
to give the more in-depth overview of OPEB. And if that doesn't work, I'll come back with some alternatives. Is the preference for an evening meeting again at 6? Or is the committee available during the work, during business hours, so to speak?
It's going to be a little bit more hit or miss for me. I could conceivably do that either earlier in the day on Tuesday or even that Monday.
Okay,
I got a few things going on, but usually mid to late afternoon might be somewhat easier for me because all of my European offices are closed by then. So it's
Yep.
just domestic chaos. It's not the international chaos.
Yeah,
okay.
Okay. So
right.
if you could give us maybe one or two choices, that would increase our success rate, I think.
Sure, okay.
Okay. All right, everybody.
I
Terrific.
move to adjourn.
Thank you for making a dinner meeting.
New Year, guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.